See a few outbreaks of rain here, but further south, a fairly calm afternoon to come. Good sunny spells, especially down towards southwest England, central southern England, and again, temperatures reaching 14 or 15 degrees. The area of rain will continue to work its way northeastwards as we go into Sunday evening. Quite a wet and windy night to come across the very far north of Scotland. That will transfer its way a little bit further southwards as we go into Monday. But overall, we start the week on a mild note. But note the temperatures on Wednesday turning colder for all of us by then.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Hello, welcome to Alastair, Stewart and Friends, but not with Alastair, but with me, Nicholas Owen. I'm stepping in for my old friend Alastair today. For the next 2 hours, I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country. Plenty coming up, including we're just waiting right now to hear from the Prime Minister. He's in Munich speaking to G7 leaders about the war in Ukraine. Also, we'll assess the state of the union. Now that Nicola Sturgeon has resigned, will a replacement continue the campaign for an independent Scotland? First, though, it's the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Good afternoon, it's 12 o'clock. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Well, as you've just been hearing, the Prime Minister is expected to urge Western leaders to double down on military support for Ukraine. Rishi Sunak, who's in Munich for a security conference and is expected to speak in the next few minutes, will tell allies that Ukraine needs advanced NATO standard capabilities to counter Russian aggression. Now, the conference is being held days before the first anniversary of Moscow's invasion. The US Vice President, the head of NATO, and China's top diplomats are also attending. However, Russian and Iranian officials have not been invited. The Prime Minister will also discuss the Northern Ireland Protocol in Germany. Rishi Sunak, who was greeted by the Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, is expected to hold talks with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on the sidelines of the summit. There's growing speculation and agreement between the UK and EU on Northern Ireland is close. It could be unveiled early next week. The body of former Premier League footballer Christian Atsu has been recovered in Turkey. His agent has confirmed the Ghanaian, who played for Newcastle, Chelsea and Everton, was found under the rubble of his home almost 2 weeks after the earthquakes. More than 45,000 people have been killed in Turkey and Syria. Rescue efforts, though, are continuing. This morning, a child was amongst the 3 people saved 296 hours after the first quake struck. One of the UK's richest people, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, has reportedly joined the race to buy Manchester United. Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani, one of the Qatar's biggest bankers, confirmed his bid to acquire the club from the Glazer family. Sir Jim has previously expressed his desire to buy Manchester United. He supported the club since childhood, although there has been no formal comment yet from his company, Ineos. Railway engineering workers are planning to walk out next month in a dispute over pay. Members of the RMT union at Balfour Beatty will hold 3 48-hour strikes on the 3rd, 10th and 17th of March. They rejected the company's offer of a 5.5% increase in pay to be backdated to April last year. Meanwhile, unions representing thousands of university staff have called off 7 days of strike action over the next 2 weeks. Issuing a joint statement, they said an agreement has been reached on pay and pensions, with a final pay offer of between 5 and 8% from August. However, the 5 planned strikes in mid-March over grading and 0 hours contracts will still go ahead. South Korea has condemned the North for firing a ballistic missile, describing the move as a clear breach of UN resolutions. Pyongyang launched a missile into the sea off its east coast this morning as the US and South Korea prepare for annual military drills. North Korea fired an unprecedented number of missiles last year, including those with the ability to strike anywhere in the United States. More memorials are planned to take place in memory of Brianna Gay, who was stabbed last week. Hundreds of people gathered in Cheshire to remember the 16-year-old who was transgender. Similar vigils were also held in Birmingham, Southampton, Nottingham and Edinburgh. Police are investigating whether she was a victim of a hate crime. A boy and a girl, both 15, were remanded in custody after being charged with her murder. And almost 2,000 homes which lost power during Storm Otto yesterday have still not been reconnected to the grid. The Met Office says the storm's passed. It's well and truly cleared. However, homes across Aberdeenshire remain without power. The Met Office says the storm, though, has now left the UK and is affecting Scandinavia. The Scottish and Southern Electricity Network says it sent food vans to the main areas still cut off from supply and hopes to restore power by the end of the day. Finally, the legal definition of treasure is set to be broadened to help museums keep more artefacts after a number of significant finds. It comes after a surge in detectorists uncovering significant artefacts. Under the current definition, the item needs to be at least 300 years old. That will change to 200, and it will be made at least in part precious metal to be considered a treasure. That will no longer be as strict. And this is GB News. More as it happens, but now it is back to Nicholas Owen.
We'll be keeping an eye on what the Prime Minister has to say and bring that to you as soon as we can. But let's talk of something else very important. If you're one of those who thinks the Union is safe, if Scotland's not going independent after all because Nicola Sturgeon has quit the stage, you may have to think again. When news that the First Minister had stepped down among a lot of I'm proud of moments in her speech, a lot of politicians and people throughout the UK thought, what a relief. Independence suddenly looks very unlikely. No such thing as sure predictions when it comes to great nations. This United Kingdom effectively became so back in 1625, when James VI of Scotland became James I of England as well. It took 82 more years to tie up Westminster's control north of the border with the actual Act of Union. Miss Sturgeon departs, saying she's sure breaking away is still a runner. And you know it could still be, as we begin to learn about a half a dozen or so possible successors who'll be manoeuvring away trying to get the top job. She became mired in blame for failures ranging from Scotland becoming Europe's worst country for drug misuse to the notorious self-identifying gender shambles. A new leader might just press all the right buttons to win over doubting Scots and get a majority for leaving the UK. But hold on, a new leader might get it all wrong. Support for the Scottish National Party might drain away. And that could be the making of Labour. If at the next general election they can grab back a lot of the 40 Westminster seats they've lost in Scotland, that much-predicted Keir Starmer victory could be a truly thunderous majority. Oh, and might the Tories actually scoop some gains if the Scots' Nats' iron grip on power at Holyrood actually fall away without Nicola? So there is much to discuss, and I have the right people to do it. And you can also get involved. Love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Right now, I'm joined now by the Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University, Sir John Curtis, a man who knows a thing about all sorts of opinion polls and people and politicians. Sir John, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. First of all, there's a lot of names, isn't there, around in Scotland. I don't know how familiar most people are with them. I don't think we are at all. Do you have any thoughts on who looks like a really good runner in this race to succeed Nicola Sturgeon?
Yeah, let's give you a quick guide to the runners and riders for those of your viewers living south of the border. Kate Forbes is currently the Finance Secretary in Scotland. She's only 32. She's recently had a baby daughter, but has long been widely tipped as a potential successor ever since back in February 2020. She got promoted to Finance Secretary 24 hours before having to present a budget, because her predecessor was forced to resign in disgrace. And she managed to survive that test very well. Also, Angus Robertson. Now, Angus Robertson, some of your viewers south of the border may remember as the Westminster leader of the SNP between 2007 and 2017. He lost his seat in 2017 to the Conservatives. He's now in the Scottish Parliament, and he's been the Scottish Government's Constitution Secretary since 2021. That is, he's basically responsible for the job of trying to promote independence north of the border. The other person who has been mentioned has said he might be considering standing is Humza Yousaf. He is the Health Secretary in Scotland, and like all health secretaries in the United Kingdom at the moment, has a pretty tough job trying to turn the health service around in the wake of the pandemic. Now, there are other names that are mentioned, but none of them, certainly in the early polling, are getting very much in the way of support. Crucial thing also to realise is that John Swinney, the Deputy First Minister, and who was once leader of the SNP 20 years ago, he has ruled himself out.
Any thoughts of your own on who might actually come out top of that pile?
Well, if the polling that's come out this morning is to be believed, it looks as though it will be a two-horse fight between Angus Robertson and Kate Forbes. Humza Yousaf actually is the best known of the potential contenders, but its misfortune seems to be that even amongst SNP members, they are disinclined to believe that he would make a good First Minister. And it may well be the fact that he's had to preside over the difficulties of the health service has damaged him. Now, neither Kate Forbes nor Angus Robertson are that well known amongst the public in general. Around a third say, I really don't know who this person is. But the polling we have this morning, both from Ipsos and from Cervantes, suggests that maybe Kate Forbes is narrowly ahead, including amongst SNP supporters. So given a straight choice, 18% of SNP supporters say they'd go for Kate Forbes, 14% for Angus Robertson. But you can already see from the relatively low numbers I'm quoting you, there are still an awful lot of people, even amongst SNP voters, who yet have to make their mind. And I think what we certainly also need to bear in mind is that, well, A, we have no contenders at the moment, and B, we don't know where the contenders are going to stand on the two issues that are thought to be central to the debate. One is, are they in favour or not of the SNP fighting the next Westminster election as a de facto referendum? And B, what, if anything, do they think should be done about the UK government's veto of the gender recognition bill? Now, whether or not Ms Forbes and Mr Robertson have different views from A, Ms Sturgeon, and B, with each other, we don't know. And I think until we know that, and until voters in Scotland, well, SNP members who will have the vote know that, I don't think we can take too much notice of this early polling.
Indeed. And let's just take the independence matter first, which right across the UK is of such importance. Do you think, in very broad and basic terms, that the resignation of Nicola Sturgeon has put that right back or not?
Short answer is we've got the first poll this morning, Nicholas, asking people how they would vote in the independence referendum. It has it at 49%, exactly the same as the same poll had it in December. More broadly, on average, if you take the half dozen polls, it's running at 48% at the moment. 49% is roughly where it's been at for the last 3 years. So there is no immediate evidence that Ms Sturgeon simply resigning has necessarily reduced support for independence. But the crucial question, of course, is whether or not Ms Sturgeon's successor will be able to promote the cause of independence, well, not just as effectively as her, but frankly, to be able to move that dial, that level of support above the 50% mark. And the question mark that hangs over both Ms Forbes and over Mr Robertson is that they're not that well known. We're not sure that either of them has the capacity to dominate Scottish politics, to be as persuasive as Nicola Sturgeon has proven to be. And if the next SNP leader is going to increase support for independence, they will need to demonstrate that quality. So I think one of the reasons why everybody's wondering, what does this mean for the SNP, is just simply the doubt as to whether any of the contenders has the capabilities and skills required to fill the very large shoes that Ms Sturgeon has left them to fill.
As ever, a masterly analysis. Thank you so much, Professor Sir John Curtis, Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University. Good to see you. Well, I'm joined now by George Kerivan, journalist and former SNP MP. Well, sir, what do you think about Ms Sturgeon's departure?
Well, Nicholas, it's nice to be on with you. Nicola was a good tactician, let's put it that way. She won 8 elections in a row of different kinds, and she's a great communicator. But she's a terrible strategist. She's walked out on the party, a shock to everyone. I mean, people knew she would go eventually, but she just called a major strategy conference to chart where the SNP was going, where the national movement was going, whether it was going to help use a general election as a de facto referendum. Having set that up, having set the hair running, having started the debate, she's walked away. And it's left everybody, scrambling for position. Angus Robertson was on holiday in the Caribbean. He's had to fly back to put his name in the ring. So she's not left the party in that good a position.
Do you think it's rather surprising that someone who was very prominent, did well, I think certainly people in Scotland would think so during the COVID troubles, that someone should have taken so many what seemed to be missteps in a very short time at the very end? It's a curious turn of events for such a very skillful politician, one would have thought.
Well, I mean, I would probably put it slightly differently. The SNP has been in government in Scotland since 2007. I mean, it's one of the longest running administrations, party in government anywhere in Europe. And you build up all sorts of problems and resentments. I'm not sure that there was a particular run of new problems that, apart from the gender recognition debate. I think just, if you're in office for a long time as a party, you accumulate difficulties. And of course, always remember the SNP, its primary view in life was to win independence. And the party and its supporters thought they would have won independence by now. And so there was a lot of short-term thinking. So now it suddenly finds itself in a position where it's having to think longer term. It hasn't yet delivered independence. That's still problematic. And so there's a fog. There's a political fog. And I think Nicola suddenly realised that and decided that she didn't want to hang around. I mean, if she had stayed, she would have had to see the party through the next general election. It's another 3-4 years. I think she'd probably had enough. So it's not that something particularly new has happened. I think she's just decided that she doesn't have the stomach for it. But it has left the party in a difficult position. It's left it without a strategy, and it's left it without a leader.
And now, what about successors? Is there anybody there that you'd put your money on?
Well, I mean, this is the important weekend, Nicholas. This is where everybody is desperately behind the scenes trying to build up support. If you throw your hat in the ring, the contenders will have to be in place by by Friday. You need 100 signatures from members. You need a range of branches to support you. It's not just an internal thing amongst the members of the Scottish Parliament. So there's a lot of work to do. So we will see who actually could jump over all those hurdles. I think Angus Robertson definitely wants to go. He's a seasoned politician. He might not be that well known in Scotland, but he's. I used to work with him at Westminster. He carries a rolled umbrella. He's very clubbable. He is a strategist, and I think he does have his eye on the notion that you have to get 55-60% of the electorate to support you before we could properly move towards independence. Kate Forbes, I think, is probably the front runner. She's the popular one. She is a social conservative. She is very religious. Nothing wrong with that, but it also impacts on the gender debate and on the abortion debate. There's talk this morning that she's trying to create a joint ticket with another MSP, Ash Regan, who's a newcomer, but who resigned over the gender recognition debate. So there could be a kind of, if you like, socially conservative bloc building up there. There's Hamza Yusuf, generally known to be a bit volatile as a personality, so he may not well go. He might not be considered by the SNP membership, who have the final vote on leader, to be the perfect candidate. There's some dark horses. There's Keith Brown, who's very popular in the party, an ex-Marine, ex-Falklands veteran, safe pair of hands. So there's a few other people, but I suspect when it comes down to it, in the scrabble to get support, it will be Angus Robertson and Kate Forbes at the line.
The Kate Forbes, as you said, that's very fascinating, isn't it? Because religious views, as you say, and there's been so much sort of talk about what you might call morality and ethics, and one of the things that Nicola Sturgeon perhaps stumbled on could take the SNP in a rather different direction altogether.
Well, it has implications for the SNP's coalition with the Green Party. In Scotland, the government is a coalition between SNP and Greens, the Greens in Scotland being supporters of independence. But the Greens, of course, are very socially liberal. And I think one of the reasons why Nicola Sturgeon backed gender recognition so fulsomely wasn't just on the issue itself, because it was part of the deal with the Greens. Now, if the SNP were to elect a leader who was, to say the least, less committed to the gender recognition legislation and fighting the UK government over it, that could lead to a split with the Greens, and that could therefore have implications for the whole of the Scottish government's political agenda. But it would also then, I think, it could scupper an agreement between the SNP and the Greens, or if they were to move forward for a de facto referendum as part of the next general election.
George Caravan, very grateful to you, former journalist and former SNP MP, talking to us here on GB News. Now then, I'm joined to carry on this debate. I mean, this is very important. As I said at the beginning, it's all about, in the end, the State of the Union, whether independence might come and all sorts of things. So it's very much not just about Scotland. I'm joined now by Jamie Blackett. He's a Scotland commentator at the Daily Telegraph, amongst many other things that he does. Very good afternoon to you. Very good to see you. Now then, well, were you among those who said, Nicola Sturgeon gone, my goodness? Or were you sort of thinking her time was up?
Well, there had been a lot of rumours circulating that she wanted to go, so I wasn't really that surprised. I think she was running out of road, actually. There were a lot of scandals circulating around her, too many crocodiles close to her canoe, I think. And public services in Scotland were seemingly getting worse. Support, I think, was really dwindling. I mean, you get a lot of these polls, but actually...
I'm very sorry to interrupt. We're having to go to Munich, where the Prime Minister is addressing G7 members. Let's see what's happening. We'll come back to Scotland in just a moment.
The Kingdom will always be on the side of freedom, democracy and the rule of law. And the security of our European continent will always be our overriding priority. Now, there's no greater example of those commitments than our response to the war in Ukraine. Just this year, we became the first country in the world to provide tanks to Ukraine, and the first to train pilots and Marines. We gave £2.3 billion last year, and we will match or exceed that in 2023. Now, other allies can tell a similar story, and our collective efforts are making a difference. But with every day that passes, Russian forces inflict yet more pain and suffering. Now, the only way to change that is for Ukraine to win. So, we need a military strategy for Ukraine to gain a decisive advantage on the battlefield, to win the war, and a political strategy to win the peace. To win the war, Ukraine needs more artillery, armoured vehicles, and air defence. So now is the moment to double down on our military support. When Putin started this war, he gambled that our resolve would falter. Even now, he is betting that we will lose our nerve. But we proved him wrong then, and we will prove him wrong now. Together, we're delivering as much equipment in the next few months as in the whole of 2022. And together, we must help Ukraine to shield its cities from Russian bombs and Iranian drones. And that's why the United Kingdom will be the first country to provide Ukraine with longer-range weapons. And it's why we're working with our allies to give Ukraine the most advanced air defence systems and build the air force they need to defend their nation. Now, of course, the United Kingdom stands ready to help any country provide planes that Ukraine can use today. But we must also train Ukrainian pilots to use the most advanced jets, and that's exactly what Britain is doing, so that Ukraine has the capability to defend its security for the long term. But to win the peace, we also need to rebuild the international order on which our international law. The whole world must hold Russia to account. We must see justice through the ICC for their sickening war crimes committed, whether in Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol, or beyond. And Russia must also be held to account for the terrible destruction it has inflicted. We are hosting the Ukraine Recovery Conference in London this June, and we should consider together how to ensure that Russia pays towards that reconstruction. Now, second, the treaties and agreements of the post-Cold War era have failed Ukraine. So we need a new framework for its long-term security. From human rights to reckless nuclear threats, from Georgia to Moldova, Russia has committed violation after violation against countries outside the collective security of NATO. And the international community's response has not been strong enough. As Jens Stoltenberg has said, Ukraine will become a member of NATO, but until that happens, we need to do more to bolster Ukraine's long-term security. We must give them the advanced NATO standard capabilities that they need for the future, and we must demonstrate that we'll remain by their side, willing and able to help them defend their country again and again. Ukraine needs and deserves assurances of that support. So ahead of the NATO summit in Vilnius, we will bring together our friends and allies to begin building those long-term assurances. And our aim should be to forge a new charter in Vilnius to help protect Ukraine from future Russian aggression. Now let me conclude with one final thought. What's at stake in this war is even greater than the security and sovereignty of one nation. It's about the security and sovereignty of every nation. Because Russia's invasion, its abhorrent war crimes and irresponsible nuclear rhetoric are symptomatic of a broader threat to everything we believe in. From the skies over North America, to the suffering on the streets of Tehran, some would destabilise the order that has preserved peace and stability for 80 years. They must not prevail, and we need not be daunted. As President Zelensky said when he addressed the UK Parliament last week, we are marching towards the most important victory of our lifetime. It will be a victory over the very idea of war, and we could have no greater purpose than to prove him right. Thank you.
Prime Minister, thank you. Your speech, I thought, was very clear. Basically, Ukraine has to win the war and Russia loses. But you said something I want to pick up on and elaborate. You talk about
that's the Prime Minister being very clear. Only quite a short speech there, emphasising the support for Ukraine will go on. He talked of Ukraine victory in the end, very definitely, that we must do all we can. He said Ukraine would eventually become a member of NATO, and that mustn't be doubted. And he also echoed the words of President Zelensky of Ukraine when he talked about this being the most important war of our lifetimes, and it must be won. Now then, we're going back now to the issue of Scotland and the resignation of Nicola Sturgeon and what it all might mean. Jamie Blackett is a Scotland commentator at the Daily Telegraph. He was just beginning to speak to us when we had to go and hear the Prime Minister, which is absolutely understandable. I'm sure you do. Thank you so much for staying with us. The question really is now, who is going to succeed her, and what direction do you think they will take the SNP in, and what direction might it mean for independence?
Well, it's interesting because I don't think there are many directions that the SNP can go in while they are hamstrung by the Butte House Agreement and their coalition with the Scottish Green Party. Your previous commentator said that he thought that the Scottish Greens were socially liberal. Well, you can say that again. I mean, they are effectively almost a Marxist party, really, and very, very socially liberal when it comes to the gender recognition and all these other bills, which are in fact Scottish Green policies, and arguably one of the factors that has brought about the demise of Nicola Sturgeon, or at least the end of her tenure as First Minister, is this deeply unpopular and divisive gender recognition policy, which was a Scottish Green manifesto commitment. So Kate Forbes or Angus Robertson, I suspect, are both rather more socially conservative than Nicola Sturgeon, but it'll be very difficult for them to get the sort of policies that they might want through with the Scottish Greens. So whether they break with the Scottish Greens and try to govern as a minority government, I suppose they could try and do that. Minority administration, it has been done before. Hamza Yousaf, is a bit of a wild card. I think it's very unlikely that he will get it. He's a deeply divisive figure in Scottish politics. And I suspect that there will be really very little change, and the never-endum of the SNP will continue because their USP is separation from the rest of the UK, breaking up Britain. If that wasn't their main policy, why would anybody vote SNP? They haven't got many other policies, and those they have got are not much good. So, that people will either vote Tory or Labour if it wasn't for that particular policy. So I think the never-endum will continue, but maybe I hope, certainly Kate Forbes, I think, would be a less toxic figure. Nicola Sturgeon has encouraged Anglophobia, encouraged the Ulsterisation of Scotland, those Republicans in Scotland of Irish extraction who want to refight the Troubles all over again on the streets of Glasgow and Dundee. I think that's, hopefully likely to come to an end, that sort of thing.
Thank you so much. Sorry to cut you off there. We have to move on. Jamie Blackett, Scotland commentator at The Telegraph, very grateful to you. You're watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and Friends with me, Nicholas Owen. Let's get more on today's show, what's coming up, including a big day for Manchester United fans as the bidding has begun to take over from the Glazers, with a Qatari banker and a British billionaire among the bidders. Who will come out on top? First, the news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
It's 12:32. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. As you may have heard in the last few minutes, the Prime Minister has urged Western leaders to double down on military aid for Ukraine and says the UK will be the first country to provide Ukraine with longer-range weapons to counter Russia's sickening war crimes, in his words. Rishi Sunak, who's in Munich for a security conference, says Ukraine needs advanced NATO standard capabilities and said Russia must be held to account for its terrible destruction. The conference being held days before the first anniversary of Moscow's invasion. Earlier, the US Vice President Kamala Harris was speaking, and she said that if Vladimir Putin thinks he can wait us out, he's badly mistaken. Time is not on his side. Well, the Prime Minister will also discuss the Northern Ireland Protocol while he is in Munich. Amid speculation a deal could be done. He was greeted by the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz earlier and will later hold talks with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. As I mentioned, speculation and agreement between the UK and the EU could be close and may be unveiled as early as next week. The body of former Premier League footballer Christian Atsu's been recovered in Turkey. His agent confirmed the Ghanaian, who played for Newcastle, Chelsea and Everton, was found almost 2 weeks after the earthquakes. More than 45,000 people have been killed in Turkey and Syria. This morning, though, a child was among 3 people rescued 296 hours after the first quake struck. One of the UK's richest people, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, has reportedly joined the race to buy Manchester United. It comes as Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani, the chairman of one of Qatar's biggest banks, confirmed his bid to acquire the club from the Glazer family. Sir Jim's previously expressed a desire to buy Manchester United, the club he has supported since childhood, although there's been no formal comment from his company, Ineos. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. But now it is back to Nicholas Owen.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Now, although the British billionaire Jim Ratcliffe is tipped to be the new owner of Manchester United, it seems he has some competition from a Qatari banker. So who will be successful in purchasing the theatre of dreams? With that and all the day's main sports news, I'm delighted to be joined by Aidan McGee. Righto, Aidan, let's Manchester United first of all. Ratcliffe looked as though he was going straight in, but it's actually going to be a fight after all.
I mean, to be fair, they made it clear, the Glazers, at the end of last year, they're looking to tentatively see who's out there and willing to buy the club. Obviously, it's not available to everybody. There's only a certain number of people who can actually do it. James Radcliffe, former Manchester United, he's Chelsea season ticket holder, actually, but born in Oldham, Man United fan, made huge amounts of money from Ineos. He made his interest apparent 2 or 3 weeks ago. He came in with a bid last night. We don't know how much that is. He has, though, secured the backing of Goldman Sachs in the city and JP Morgan as well. So serious contender there. It will involve him loading debt onto the club effectively because he's borrowing money, but that's generally how these things work anyway. However, with Qatar and the wealth of the Public Investment Fund they're coming with a bid last night, £4 billion, and that doesn't involve loading debts onto the club. They've pledged to regenerate Old Trafford. They've pledged to regenerate the area around Old Trafford, improve the training ground in Carrington, just over near the M60, and do effectively what Abu Dhabi Group did with Manchester City 14 years ago when they took over. The gentleman's name is Jassim Ban Jaber Al Thani. He's actually known to his friends as JBJ. Now, the problem that the Qatar bid has is that they already own Paris Saint-Germain. It's one thing owning two clubs in Europe. If you own two clubs in the Premier League, which a Saudi bid would do because they already own Newcastle, that presents a problems anyway. They're looking to circumvent the problem of having two clubs in Europe by setting up a subsidiary arm to buy Man United. Now, we all know where the money's coming from. That's a bridge for the Premier League to cross. I would argue their standards quite low. They let Newcastle be taken over by the Saudis last year, even though every single member of the board was attached to the Saudi government. So that's where we are at the moment. We think there might still be a bid from Saudi, but nothing forthcoming. And let me be clear, a soft deadline means we'd like your bids in by email last night by 10 o'clock, but if you fancy blowing someone out of the water in the next 2 or 3 weeks, please feel free to do so. So 2 bids so far, definitely. Saudi possible. US is an interesting one. Do we get one from there? It's interesting, isn't it? We're talking in countries now, bidding for football clubs. Yeah. Now, that's one that's been rumoured to have an association with the backing of David Beckham. We don't know that for certain. I think somebody with legendary status on the pitch at Manchester United would have to be very, very careful with who he gets involved with. That would need a forensic, detailed analysis of who the bidders actually are before he puts his name to it. Far be it from him being associated with Man United, he has a brand of his own to protect as well. And then, of course, Elon Musk. Could he be involved? Let's see. But it's going to take a while, Nicholas, because they're going to want top dollar.
Right. OK. Aidan McGee, thanks very much indeed, as ever. Now then, you're watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and Friends with me, Nicholas Owen. Plenty more still to come this afternoon, including a deal to resolve the controversial Northern Ireland Protocol is very much game on, according to the leader of Sinn Féin. We'll be crossing live to Stormont next, but first...
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us. on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News, but it's with me today, Nicholas Owen. A deal to resolve the controversial Northern Ireland Protocol is very much game on, according to the leader of Sinn Féin. Following a day of talks with political leaders in Northern Ireland, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, played down the prospect of an imminent breakthrough today, saying there was more work to do to reach an agreement. This all comes with reports of a Tory rebellion for the Prime Minister, some in his party fearing his proposed deal does not go far enough. Well, let's get all the latest on that with our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie. Doogie, tell us what you know.
Well, first of all, welcome to Stormont, and this is the place in the whole of Europe, the whole of the British Isles, that was hit the hardest by the protocol. There's no government here because unionists, of course, say that it brings them out of the union. They have no political representation, and that goods here are under European courts of justice rather than under UK law. But you got to look at what the protocol is. Well, people would tell you there was massive advantages to it. Of course, that's not true, because what it was a deal designed to protect the integrity of the single market and its nearest neighbour, and that, of course, was the Republic of Ireland. They're inside the EU. Of course, the British Isles aren't, or Britain isn't inside the EU, so therefore they had to protect that market, and they protected it by keeping Northern Ireland inside EU legislation, and of course that kept them inside the economics of the EU. People say there was all these advantages. Well, with Britain leaving, nobody was ever going to leave a magical porthole for Britain to put its stuff through and back into the EU while not paying into it. So the mood music after Boris Johnson left changed totally. And it's changed with the businessmen and women of Europe. And they are now speaking in a far higher level and maybe prepared to talk about goods that are coming in two different lanes. Those that are coming in green lanes that are only going to stay in Northern Ireland, and those that are in red lanes going into the EU. So that will be back to where we were 3 years ago. European courts of justice. They still want to say in Northern Ireland. That will be a sticking point if there's any. The mood music had changed yesterday, but it's who Rishi Sunak spent time with. He spent 20 to 30 minutes with most political parties, with the DUP. The evening was spent with them, and at least an hour-long meeting on Friday. So that's where he's going to try and see how he can move the DUP into position. But the DUP will not fall for any promises. They will want to see stuff in writing, through legislation and in place before they sign up to a deal to come back here again, and that will be Rishi Sunak's problem. The credibility has gone from any political leadership inside the UK with the unionist parties in Northern Ireland.
BT, GB News Northern Ireland reporter, thank you very much. The financial hardship that the UK is facing is here for the long haul, and with the rise in energy prices and the general cost of living, families are struggling to make ends meet. Well, here, I hope, to give us her tips is Ola Majakadomi, founder of All Things Money, for this week's Saturday Savings. Well, now then, do you have 5 top tips for us that we can follow to save some money?
Absolutely. Hi, Nicholas. Thank you for having me. So, yeah, I guess number one is always like my biggest top tip is for a lot of families to try and create a budget. Now, I feel like a lot of people roll their eyes at the thought of a budget, but a budget is crucial to work out what you can and can't afford to spend, especially now rising bills we're going to have to account for. So that's my number one tip. Tip number 2, try and build an emergency pot of savings if you can. Again, that budget will help you build that emergency pot of savings so you know you have money to fall back on rather than having to resort to any streams of debt. Now, my third tip is my favourite is to utilise on cashback websites. Now, a lot of people always think that these are scams, but websites such as Top Cashback and Quidco are brilliant if you're someone that likes to do online shopping. These websites allow you to give a percentage of your money back on your shopping online, which is great. I'd also recommend utilising comparison websites, especially if you're maybe looking to renew your insurance policies, if you need to update your bills, etc., etc. Comparison websites such as moneysupermarket.com and money.co.uk are great websites for this. And lastly, as we know, obviously the cost of living crisis has had a huge impact on families across the UK. It's really important that people really do reach out and talk to people, whether that's their family, organisations, whether that's your energy providers, your banks. If you're defaulting on anything, please reach out and talk to people.
In your experience, what are the things that people are most worried about? Is there a particular theme, something that comes through an awful lot?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think a lot of people now, obviously, we've realised that the cost of living has gone up. But I think loads of people are worried about how long this rate of inflation is going to last for. So I think lots of people are now trying to adjust this kind of new normal, and I think that's probably the biggest worry about how long people are going to have to pinch their pennies for.
And what should people be most wary of? We all talk about scams and everything else. There seem to be more and more of those, and particularly fastening on the worries that people have at the moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like you said, Nicholas, hit the nail on the head. Lots of scams at the moment. There's lots of get-rich-quick schemes, which I know are preying on the vulnerable at the moment, both on social media, outside, just general banking scams, all that stuff. I think it's really important that people stay clear of that. And then also buy now, pay later schemes. If you can avoid using those as well. I know it's very easy to fall into that trap, but if you can avoid those kind of schemes as well, I'd really recommend it.
Yeah. And what about this business? It's sort of things that bug me. A lot of people still need cash, don't they? And getting cash is getting more and more difficult. Banks are getting more difficult to access. There's always the jolly old post office that you can use. I've only discovered this quite recently. I must be very slow, I suppose. If you've got a bank card at all, you can go in there and get cash, and they'll give you fivers and coins and everything else, which you still need for a lot of things, don't you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like, especially for those that are maybe struggling to stick to their budgets at the moment, cash can be king. I feel like scientifically it's proven that, if you're spending with cash rather than your Apple Pay or your credit cards, etc., it's really easy to keep handle and keep track of your spending that way as well.
Indeed. Now, the other thing is we see so many of these big companies, the oil companies, the energy companies, British Gas and so on, making enormous profits, absolutely enormous profits. Can you please, in relatively simple terms, explain to us why we've all got to pay so much more for our energy, but these people are making so much more in profits? What's going on?
That's a good question. I wish I honestly knew the answer. I do think, sadly, we just know that the cost of production has gone up, the cost of importing goods have gone up. So again, those have really been passed on to us rather than, these energy bills, energy providers paying for these costs themselves.
Yes. And now the other thing a lot of people talk about are food banks. They are very important, are they? And I don't know about you, but having visited several of them, I think people, first of all, it's great if people donate items to it, if you can possibly do that. Buy a bit more at the supermarket, I think, and put it in the food bank if you can. But also encourage people to actually use them. A lot of people must find it difficult to do so, Ola.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I completely agree with that. I think a lot of people are embarrassed to go to these food banks. But again, those food banks are there to help us. They're a great facility. I think it's a huge shame that we're really even having to use these kind of services. But again, like I said, they're out there to help us. Also, local councils have a lot of schemes that people should take advantage of. Also, checking the government website to see what help you might be eligible for in the forms of benefits as well, because I know a lot of people's financial situations have changed. Again, there's no shame in seeking benefits. Any additional help, like I said, the help is there to help us out through these times.
Ola Majikadomi, founder of All Things Money, thank you very much indeed. Some important tips there. I'm making note of them. As I say, I'm a bit silly about some of these things. I've been a bit slow on the uptake, but people like you, very helpful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Right. OK, now then, this is GB News, and you've been getting in touch. We do love to hear from you, particularly on the State of the Union, which is something that we have been looking at in some detail today. This is Bill here. Bill says, I don't think the Union is not any safer. This is following Nicola Sturgeon's departure, of course. Not any safer. Not as long as the English Parliament rules over Scotland. Ask the Irish. Ask the Welsh. OK, we got that, Bill. Peter says this. First Salmond. Of course, Alex Salmond. Mustn't forget him. He was the previous leader of the SNP. Resigned in, well, he was pushed out in rather bitter circumstances by Nicola Sturgeon. Now she's gone. So Peter says this. First Salmond. First Salmond, now Sturgeon, the two big fish hooked. The demise of the SNP could not be better news for the unity of the UK. Now perhaps the education and the health service will improve. I think he means the health service in Scotland, particularly there. And we have Chris here as well. He says this. I hope the new Scottish First Minister focuses on the day-to-day issues that matter to people in Scotland. However, it would be the same party in charge and the same policies. Labour will be no different either. That's an interesting point, isn't it? Talking about the people who might benefit from all of this if the Scottish National Party starts to unravel a bit. Labour might well do very well out of that. Maybe even some hope for the Conservatives in Scotland who've had such a very rough time over the last few years. Do keep your views coming in and do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're at GB News. Just to remind you of the way to get in touch, the easiest way to get it, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'm Nicholas Owen, standing in for Alastair Stewart today. Lots more coming up on the show this afternoon. Next up, we'll be discussing the State of the Union again, following the resignation of Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. But first, let's take an all-important look at the weather.
Hello there. Welcome to your Met Office forecast. I'm Craig Snell. So here's the situation for this weekend. Still some rain around, especially across the north of the country, but for the south, it's certainly going to remain very mild. So here's the situation at the moment. We've had a couple of areas of low pressure move through overnight. This one will still continue to track its way eastwards as we go through Saturday. So into this afternoon, we've still got a weather front just lingering across the very far south of the UK, and then this next area of rain just moving into southern Scotland as the afternoon goes on. In between, and also across the very far north of Scotland, we will see some bright spells and certainly a calmer day for north east Scotland compared to Friday. But in the sunshine across the Midlands into East Anglia, we could see highs reaching 14, 15, possibly even 16 degrees. So another very mild day to come. Into this evening, the band of rain across Scotland will gradually work its way into the North Sea. This will allow some clearer and colder conditions to develop, so we could see a few icy patches come Sunday morning. Elsewhere, a cooler night than of late, but still on the mild side. Temperatures generally staying up into the mid-single figures. So we start the day on a fairly quiet note across the south, but further north we have this band of rain which will gradually work its way across Scotland as the day goes on, turning quite heavy and persistent and accompanied by a strengthening wind. Northern Ireland, Northern England also rather cloudy, could just see a few outbreaks of rain here, but further south a fairly calm afternoon to come, good sunny spells, especially down towards southwest England, central southern England, and again temperatures reaching 14 or 15 degrees. The area of rain will continue to work its way northeastwards as we go into Sunday evening. Quite a wet and windy night to come across the very far north of Scotland. That will transfer its way a little bit further southwards as we go into Monday. But overall, we start the week on a mild note. But note the temperatures on Wednesday turning colder for all of us by then.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programmes sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and a warm welcome, especially if you've just joined us. I'm Nicholas Owen, sitting in for Alastair Stewart today, and we are in the last hour of the programme. I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio. Plenty more still to come, including are we looking at a more united kingdom with Nicola Sturgeon leaving her role, or will her successor push for a new indie ref? Plus, sticking with Scottish politics, we'll head to Edinburgh for this year's Scotland's Labour Conference. But first, let's get the latest news with Aaron.
Hi there, it's 1 o'clock. Good afternoon to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The UK will be the first country to provide longer-range weapons to Ukraine, with the Prime Minister saying now is the time to double down on military support. Addressing the Munich Security Conference, Rishi Sunak said the world's response to Russian aggression hasn't been strong enough. He told allies advanced NATO standard capabilities are needed to counter the Kremlin's attack, and Moscow must be held accountable for crimes against humanity.
What's at stake in this war is even greater than the security and sovereignty of one nation. It's about the security and sovereignty of every nation. Because Russia's invasion, its abhorrent war crimes and irresponsible nuclear rhetoric are symptomatic of a broader threat to everything we believe in.
The Prime Minister also addressed reports a deal with the EU over the Northern Ireland Protocol could be imminent. Rishi Sunak, who was greeted by the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz at the summit, said both parties understand what needs to be done for the new post-Brexit trade arrangement, but there's no deal yet. He expected to hold talks later with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The body of the former Premier League footballer Christian Atsu has been recovered in Turkey. His agent confirmed the Ghanaian, who played for Newcastle, Chelsea and Everton, was found under the rubble of his home almost 2 weeks after the earthquakes. More than 45,000 people have been killed in Turkey and Syria. Rescue efforts have continued, though. This morning, a child was amongst 3 people saved 296 hours after the first quake struck. One of the UK's richest people, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, has confirmed his company Ineos has joined the race to buy Manchester United. It comes as Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani, the chairman of one of Qatar's biggest banks, confirmed his bid to acquire the club from the Glazer family. Sir Jim has previously expressed his desire to buy Manchester United, a club he has supported since childhood. Railway engineering workers are planning to walk out next month in a dispute over pay. Members of the RMT union at Balfour Beatty will hold 3 48-hour strikes on the 3rd, 10th and 17th of March. They rejected the company's offer of a 5.5% increase in pay to be backdated to April last year. Meanwhile, unions representing thousands of university staff have called off 7 days of strike action over the next 2 weeks. Issuing a joint statement, they said an agreement has been reached on pay and pensions, with a final offer of between 5 to 8% from August. However, the 5 planned strikes in mid-March over grading and 0 hours contracts will still go ahead. South Korea's condemned the North for firing a ballistic missile, describing the move as a clear breach of UN resolutions. Pyongyang launched a missile into the sea off its east coast this morning as the US and South Korea prepare for annual military drills. North Korea fired an unprecedented number of missiles last year, including those with the ability to strike anywhere in the United States. More memorials are being planned to take place in memory of Brianna Gay, who was stabbed last week. Hundreds of people gathered in Cheshire to remember the 16-year-old who was transgender. Similar vigils were also held in Birmingham, Southampton, Nottingham and Edinburgh. Police are investigating whether she was the victim of a hate crime. A boy and a girl, both 15, were remanded in custody after being charged with her murder. Almost 2,000 homes, which lost power during Storm Otto, have still not been reconnected to the grid. The Met Office says the storm has well and truly cleared, but homes across Aberdeenshire are without power. It says the storm's now left the UK and is affecting Scandinavia. The Scottish and Southern electricity networks say they've sent food vans to the main areas that are still cut off. It says it hopes to restore power by the end of the day. And the legal definition of treasure is set to be broadened to help museums keep more artefacts after significant fines. It comes after a surge in the number of detectorists uncovering historical artefacts. Under the current definition, the item needs to be at least 300 years old and be made at least in part of precious metal to be considered a treasure. This is GB News. More as it happens, but now back to Nicholas Owen.
Scottish politics has, you could argue, for years now had an outsized voice in the wider UK political conversation. Nicola Sturgeon decided to throw in the towel and resign this week, and that matters massively in Scotland, but also everywhere else in the UK too. It is a very, very important event indeed. Many say she focused too much on IndyRef 2 and less on other important matters like Scotland becoming Europe's worst country for drug misuse. But what does her going really mean for the future of the Union? I'm joined now in the studio by Dr. Craig Prescott, constitutional expert at Bangor University. Good afternoon to you. A lot of people will say IndyRef 2. Oh, please remind me what that's about. Why is it a significant phrase, and might it be coming back?
OK, so IndyRef 2 is what we use to describe the idea of a second Scottish independence referendum like the one we had in 2014. And essentially the SNP's position after the first referendum was lost was that we would hold a second referendum if there had been a significant change in circumstances, such as the UK leaving the European Union. And of course that happened. The SNP have continued to be successful in Scottish elections of one form or another. And so Scottish independence has remained on the agenda with IndyRef 2.
So where are we now? Nicola Sturgeon has gone. There's a whole galaxy of names of people that particularly English people are probably going to struggle, or people in the rest of the UK struggle with a bit. Let's just go through the most likely riders and runners and what that might mean for the future direction of policy for the SNP and therefore the future debate about independence.
Yes, well, it is difficult if you're based in England to really just get that day-to-day sense of Scottish politics. And so it's interesting to see how, the fact that these are relatively unknown to us shows us how Scottish politics has become. And, there are people like, Angus Robertson, who we may know from being in Westminster, but has gone back to the Scottish Parliament. And so he's one that we may recognise. There are one or two others. The health minister, whose name I've proving the point, and the name I've forgotten. It's sort of
Youssef, I think.
Yes, who had some prominence during the pandemic, inevitably. And there's the
Lady Kate Forbes.
That's the one I'm thinking of, Kate Forbes, who relatively new in the Scottish government, and her own personal beliefs may impact as regards the gender recognition bill.
Yes, she's very much a committed Christian, and of course in Scotland there are various grades of that, if I can put it that way. But her views, if she gets the top job, could actually influence SNP policies pretty significantly, it seems.
Well, yes, and the other thing is that the SNP is a broad coalition, as we could see with some of the runners and riders, but also the SNP is in coalition with the Green Party in Scotland. And, the Green Party are socially liberal. And so, if she becomes First Minister, that might put pressure on the coalition that you have at Holyrood. And so there may be a decision about whether to judicially review the Westminster government blocking the gender recognition bill, and that might be her first big test if she becomes First Minister.
Do you think there are some rays of hope here for Labour to revive itself in Scotland? Do you think, with the going of Nicola Sturgeon and possible changes in the direction of the Scots Nats policy?
I think so, because, with Nicola Sturgeon going, that is, someone who has dominated Scottish politics for the past 10 years or so. And, that inevitably creates space. And inevitably people may start to look elsewhere. And, if Labour are doing generally well in the polls, more broadly speaking, for the next general election in 2024, then, some Scottish SNP voters may find themselves voting Labour next time round, and that puts a different hue on the independence question overall. What you might think is that maybe Nicola Sturgeon has pursued IndyRef 2 to the exclusion of other things. And now other things have risen on the agenda, and, that does create an opportunity for Labour. And the polls have started to just narrow a little bit, with the SNP falling a touch and Labour coming up. So there's opportunities there, I think, for the 2024 general election.
Because the point's been made a lot, hasn't it? Although independence is always the thing that most people, certainly people outside of Scotland, think of in terms of people like Nicola Sturgeon, there are some other very, very big issues hanging around. There's the drugs problem that we talked about, educational standards not matching up to people's hopes. Policing in Scotland seems to be in a mess. There's even a bit of a financial problem around the SNP coffers themselves. There are a lot of issues. It's not just a single thing.
No, and I think that is perhaps why Nicola Sturgeon has chosen now to go, that there's perhaps been a window for her to decide to go now. If she left it any longer, then she would have had to lead the SNP into the Westminster election which we're expecting next year. And then it's only 2 more years before the next Scottish parliamentary election. So there was a distinct window here for her to go and perhaps think, yes, maybe this is as far as I've got, and it's now time for new leadership to have a new approach to these problems. Yes, and that's good, and in the interest of the SNP.
Yes, she said she didn't want to be an obstacle to things, which is an understandable thing to say. Any hope at all that the Tories can make any sort of comeback in the midst of all of this change?
I think what's been really interesting over the past few years is that Conservative fortunes in Scotland had improved, particularly when Ruth Davidson was leader. And at one point they were the second largest party in Scotland, and that's not what we would traditionally expect, sort of post-Thatcher and all of that, sort of taking a broader view. It seems that maybe after the referendum, politics in Scotland was either you're for the Union, in which case you vote for the most unionist party, or you're for independence, in which case you vote for the SNP. There wasn't much space for Labour there. But now, you're possibly voting Labour, yes, to sort of, for reasons Scottish politics, but also to get the Tories out in Westminster. There's like other reasons now to choose how to vote. And so that sort of, the Conservatives are in difficulties UK-wide, and I think that's going to flow into Scotland. And I think what you're going to have in Scotland a sort of, I think the battle is going to be between the SNP and Labour. But then that raises questions for Labour as to how do they approach the future of the Union.
Dr. Craig Prescott, thank you very much indeed, a constitutional expert there at Bangor University. Grateful for that. Well, we mentioned the Conservatives there, and I'm joined now by Miles Briggs, who's Tory MSP for Lothian. Good afternoon to you. Very lovely to see you. That sounded all a bit bleak for your party, didn't it? There was mention of Ruth Davidson, who will always say, oh, yes, she did rather well, didn't she? But since then, you sort of, you're having a struggle to get into this fight, aren't you?
Well, no, I don't think so. And when you look at where we are in Scotland, we are the official opposition, we are the second party, and we're the main challengers to the SNP as well. So in all the key seats at the next Holyrood election, which can be taken off the SNP, it is the Conservatives who are in second place and can win those. So that's where, for the next general election, and I agree with what your commentator said in terms of the constitutional divide in Scotland, that very much is still there. But the opportunity to remove SNP MSPs comes about by voting Conservative in Scotland. And that's a message we'll continue to put across.
Now then, what about Nicola Sturgeon leaving? Were you surprised by it? And what do you think the implications might be?
So I think, being quite honest, yes, people were surprised. They maybe thought at some point between now and after the next UK general election, she would go, but not at this moment in time. So we'll see her reasoning why she has gone for that. But I think, above all, there's an opportunity for us as a parliament, as Scottish politics in general, to move on and to look at the priorities which really face the country. And you've touched upon them in terms of the challenges around our drug deaths, which is totally unacceptable, but also everything else which is devolved to the Scottish Parliament is not performing well. And so I hope there is an opportunity now for the new First Minister to really look at what they're responsible for and the policies they should be delivering for the people of Scotland as well.
So when you look at the riders and runners, we seem to be getting, well, at least Angus Robertson, Kate Forbes, there are a couple of names that ring a few bells perhaps outside of Scotland. Let's just take them one at a time. Kate Forbes, do tell us what sort of opponent might she be for you?
I think Kate's quite an interesting politician. She's a Highland politician. So in terms of the central belt bias, which this government's certainly built up, it would be interesting to see how she brings a different sort of politics to that. But, she's someone I think would be an interesting colleague to see become First Minister. I'm not quite sure either of these individuals have declared that they want to stand at this moment in time, to be honest. But it's not really about the personality. For me, I think what we need to see is the country move forward and we turn the page finally on the grievance and division which we've seen in Scottish politics. So sorry to say, but I don't think the leopard will change its spots regardless of who we will see take over from Nicola Sturgeon.
But Kate Forbes is an interesting case, isn't she? And it sort of touches on the way that politics in Scotland has all sorts of interesting wrinkles, if you like to put it that way, because she's a very religious person. And then we had all this, the gender issue that came up. Might take the party in a slightly different way, or even a quite radically different way. And that would make life more interesting for you, wouldn't it?
Indeed, and leadership elections are not fun things in politics, let's be honest with that. So I think we're about to see a real civil war within the SNP break out, and whoever becomes leader, where they sit politically, and Kate probably is your more centre-right politician within the SNP, I think a lot of people potentially want to leave the SNP if she does become leader, because they wouldn't connect with her politics, to be quite honest. So I think whatever happens at the end of this process, we will see a divided government and divided Scottish National Party. And I think for the Union, that can only be a good thing.
Yeah. Now, Ruth Davidson, I think she's... forgive me if I'm wrong here. I think she said she's ruled herself right out of coming back or anything like that. No chance at all, do you think, that someone go and knock on her door and say, come on, Ruth, come and help us here. This is a great opportunity.
Ruth's a friend and colleague, and certainly, did an amazing job when she did lead our party. But knowing her quite well, I think the last thing she would want to do is get back into elected politics, to be quite honest. And she's having a great life with Finn, her son, and partner Jen. So I don't think going back into elected politics is high on her agenda, to be quite honest.
Right. OK, now let's move on to the important issue of where this might lead. Might leave the independence debate. Do you think it's possible that we could see... I know you don't want to talk individual candidates. We don't even know if people are standing, and it's very difficult to tell how they will change things. But might it just lead, with the departure of Nicola Sturgeon, to a different approach to the whole massive subject of independence?
I hope it does, but as I've said, I don't think the SNP are going to overnight change what they've been fighting for. I hope they do understand that Scotland needs to heal and move on, and we haven't from the 2014 referendum. And I think that is really something every politician in Scotland needs to consider, because we need to, as a country, get back to delivering what we're in Parliament to do, not just always these constitutional divisions which keep being brought up and up again. So I hope there is an opportunity to move on from the divisions of the past. But more importantly, I think there's also a need for the SNP to understand where the country actually wants the Parliament to focus on what matters to them, not what matters to the Scottish National Party.
You don't think there's a sort of way that your party would like to somehow bring forward and try and get some popularity going for something that would seal off this independence question for good and all? You do hear sometimes there's something called, I think it's the Canadian issue or something of that sort. Not quite sure what that means, but do you think it's going to hang around and haunt Scottish politics come what may?
So I feel people are starting to want to move on from this debate, to be quite honest. And I think Nicola Sturgeon going probably does also present an opportunity for people to look again. But more importantly, as a country, we need to move forward from this. This has not been, in political terms, a great period of time. And, in Canada, the two referendums they have also created great divisions in that country. But I think there's an opportunity now for us as Conservatives. We will always be the strongest voice for the United Kingdom. I've always thought, and I still do to this day, that there's a silent majority in Scotland who want to always make sure we are part of our United Kingdom and stay that way. So I think for most people in Scotland, they want to see us move on from that. And Nicola Sturgeon going probably presents that opportunity on that road to unite our country once again.
Clearly put. Miles Briggs, Conservative MSP for Lothian, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, now I am joined by Alastair Stewart, but no, it's not the lad himself. He's taking a break today. This Alastair Stewart is a commentator for the Scotsman newspaper, and it's a great pleasure to have him on our show this afternoon. Well, Alastair, when you heard that Sturgeon was going to resign, or she did resign, were you among those who said, "Good heavens, I would never have expected this," or did you have some suspicions yourself?
I had some suspicions. I think many saw that over the last couple of weeks, things were not going particularly well for the First Minister. She wasn't at her best. She was performing in a way which is not the Nicola of 5-6 years ago. Her approach to politics has always been to put independence first and Scottish policies second in that respect. That's been a recent development over the last couple of years. Previously, the approach that she took was to try and make the very best of Scotland's devolution settlement, to put that first and make it an absolute priority, and then let nature take its course. Independence as a stepping stone after that. She struggled recently because it was independence. The Supreme Court deferment there was an ill-timed strategy. Everyone who understands Scottish politics knew what the end result was going to be for that. So her resignation, while premature perhaps, was not totally surprising to those paying close attention to how her performance has been of late.
Now then, who do you think benefits? Is it time? Could it be possible that Labour will make inroads from now on, as we were hearing earlier on from our friend from Bangor University?
I think it's inevitable that Scottish Labour will see a resurgence. The SNP have a fundamental problem over the last number of years, certainly since the 2014 referendum. A massive issue is that they've not demarcated the yes movement, that is to say people who support Scottish independence but might not necessarily be members of the SNP, and SNP politics itself. Now, you saw with Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon's predecessor, and then a continuance with Nicola Sturgeon, that it was personality first in many respects, as the introduction said. The removal of Nicola Sturgeon, she didn't lose an election. She's suffered, as I was saying, a difficult couple of weeks, but most leaders do. It's pretty standard practice. She's gone. She's jumped ship very suddenly and very quickly. There's a massive question mark then of which next big beast is going to take over. It is a deeply unpalatable situation for many people that are both members of the SNP and part of the wider Yes movement. Miles was touching on that there's going to be a civil war within the SNP. There is. You need either a candidate that comes forward and is a big beast and can continue in the vein of Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, or, which I think has not been given enough consideration, a quieter candidate, someone who can consolidate the SNP, tighten what the actual strategy is to achieve independence, because over the last couple of months it's very much felt like Nicola Sturgeon was making it up as she went along. That will take time, and you need someone in post who can do that, but with a cross-party appeal in Scotland. I was disappointed to see that Deputy First Minister John Swinney ruled himself out. John Swinney was it was his resignation back in the early noughties that prompted the rise of Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon. The last leadership election when Salmond resigned there was no challenger, it was Nicola Sturgeon. She stepped in, and here we are today. Swinney possesses the likability, he possesses the knowledge, and he possesses the skill. You need a candidate like that who can put Scotland back on the front foot with its policy agenda. There are a plethora of things, as other participants have been saying, that have been neglected in Scotland. You can just pick one and run with it. It's not going particularly well. It's a shambles in many respects. And if you don't get a candidate in who's going to tighten the policy ranks and tighten what the agenda is for the party, then you're looking at a situation where they are going to have deep problems at the next Scottish general election.
What about Alex Salmond? He sort of founded the Alba Party, didn't he? And constantly sniping, and a lot of bitterness between him and Nicola Sturgeon. Is he likely to play a big role in what's about to happen?
No, I think one needs to be careful with Salmond and not make him a kingmaker in that respect. His voice is still heard, but he's very much out of the rank and file of the SNP. When something goes wrong with the party, he's there to voice an opinion on it. what caught my attention the other day was when he said that the Yes movement has very much found itself without a rudder with the sudden departure of Nicola Sturgeon. I agree with that completely. His analysis and his knowledge of the Yes movement will be particularly insightful, but it is not for him to decide who is going to be the next First Minister. His voice will carry some weight, but it's the rank and file of the SNP that need to seriously figure out what configuration they want over the next 3-4 years. And it's an internal matter. And I think that the resignation of Nicola Sturgeon has prompted a very sudden existential analysis that they need to undertake of themselves. And maybe, she wasn't going to go on forever. But this was a question that was very much going to be kicked down the road for quite some time. She herself was joking about it at the end of last year, that no immediate plans for her departure. If you can't, or members can't answer that question now, they're going to be in trouble. It's not particularly helpful that the election process for the next SNP leader has been condensed into a month. Previously, that process would take several months. So these questions, which would go on for quite some time and allow candidates to set up their stall and allow people to make their case, have to be answered next week, very suddenly. And that's a lot of thinking to do after 16 years.
Alastair Stewart, very grateful to you. Alastair Stewart, their commentator for the Scotsman. Thank you. And we've been getting a lot of reaction as ever here on GB News. And we have, for example, Adele says this: there is no one capable to take over the SNP. They are a disaster. They have ruined the country. They need to be audited, I think she means to say there, to find the UK government money that has not been passed on to councils. Labour and Conservative have done nothing to fight them and do things for the people. Oh dear, that sounds a bit despairing, doesn't it? Anyway, another one here. I've got Paul here. Paul says this: the next Scottish Parliament election is due to take place on the 7th of May 2026. I wonder if the new First Minister, when elected, will dissolve the Scottish Parliament and bring forward those elections. Are they able to do so? Don't know what the constitutional situation is with that. Anyway, interesting point. And Elizabeth says here, my fear now is that Angus Robertson may win the leadership. He's a name that has come up quite a bit and a name that might be vaguely familiar to people back in the rest of the UK. My fear now is that Angus Robertson may win the leadership and prove a better, more appealing leader for the cause of partition. Whether he will do anything to right the terrible neglect of Scotland that we, Nicola, has wrought, I can't say. Well, always great to hear from you. As I say, GB Views at gbnews.uk. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're at GB News. Now then, politicians from across the political divide have condemned plans to hold a protest outside a hotel which is housing asylum seekers. The protest, which will be taking place in Newquay in Cornwall within the week, has been described as racist. Well, our GB News reporter Jeff Moody has been to find out more.
Oleg Ignatiev owns the Newquay Beach Hotel. He's decided to open his hotel 24/7 to offer refuge to anyone fearing for their safety.
You're in Newquay, it's a small community, and a lot of people frequently post about their concerns on Facebook, and people rally around them. And the post said that that there've been people who are being followed at night, and in the comments you could see there's a lot of people who were also concerned because they had a similar experience. So it made sense that because we're open 24/7, it made a lot of sense that we would be a place that people could come into and feel, safe. And if they needed to, we could call the police and we could keep them safe whilst, they were being, if they were being followed or anything else.
Locals are reporting being followed home, not feeling safe on their streets. Some blame the influx of asylum seekers currently housed in a popular Newquay hotel, and it's making the community angry. And it's that anger that's really beginning to worry police. Tempers are frayed, feelings are running high, and the idea that a protest coupled with a counter-protest at the same time could spill into something far more serious. Like Knowsley in Liverpool, last week 15 people were arrested after protests outside a hotel housing migrants. A police officer and 2 members of the public suffered minor injuries and a police van was set on fire. Police are anxious the same doesn't happen in Cornwall. In a statement, Devon and Cornwall Police told GB News, "We are aware of a planned protest due to take place in Newquay. We are seeking to engage with the protest organisers. Police will facilitate peaceful protest and use relevant legislation to keep communities safe. We will continue to review any information received regarding this matter." GB News approached the organisers of the protest as well as the organisers of the counter-protest, but no one was able to speak to us. Politicians have been unanimous in calling for the planned protest to be abandoned, but GB News' Nigel Farage believes it's wrong to dub the action as far-right.
Already, the Conservative leader of Cornwall Council has condemned what they're doing as racist. The Labour Party have joined in as well. And now, a collection of various refugee charities have got together today. They claim they represent up to 500 groups around the country, calling on government to condemn protests against those that cross the English Channel, filling up our hotels. I'll tell you what's going on here. They are trying to suppress any comment, any criticism of what is going on a massive scale around our communities.
Police must now toe a fine line between allowing free speech and keeping the peace. Jeff Moody, GB News.
More to come, plenty of it this afternoon on Alastair, Stewart and Friends with me, Nicholas Owen, today. Sticking with Scotland, we'll be heading to Edinburgh for this year's Scottish Labour Conference. First, though, let's get the headlines with Aaron.
It's 1:32. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The UK will be the first country to provide longer-range weapons to Ukraine, with the Prime Minister saying now is the time to double down on military support. Addressing the Munich Security Conference, Rishi Sunak said the world's response to Russian aggression hasn't been strong enough. He told allies advanced NATO standard capabilities are needed to counter the Kremlin's attack and that Moscow must be held to account for crimes against humanity.
What's at stake in this war is even greater than the security and sovereignty of one nation. It's about the security and sovereignty of every nation. Because Russia's invasion, its abhorrent war crimes and irresponsible nuclear rhetoric are symptomatic of a broader threat to everything we believe in.
The Minister also addressed reports a deal with the EU over the Northern Ireland Protocol could be imminent. Rishi Sunak, who was greeted by the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz at the summit, says both parties understand what needs to be done for the new post-Brexit trade agreement, but there's no deal yet. He's expected to hold talks with European Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen this afternoon. The body of former Premier League footballer Christian Atsu has been recovered in Turkey. His agent confirmed the Ghanaian, who played for Newcastle, Chelsea and Everton, was found almost 2 weeks after the earthquakes. More than 45,000 people have been killed in Turkey and Syria. This morning, though, a child was among 3 people rescued 296 hours after the first quake struck. The British billionaire Sir Jim Ratcliffe has confirmed he and his petrochemicals company Ineos have joined the race to buy Manchester United. He's competing against Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani, the chairman of one of Qatar's biggest banks. Sir Jim says he wants to make Manchester United the #1 club in the world again. TV online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your Met Office forecast. I'm Craig Snell. So here's the situation for this weekend. Still some rain around, especially across the north of the country, but for the south, it's certainly going to remain very mild. So here's the situation at the moment. We've had a couple of areas of low pressure move through overnight. This one will still continue to track its way eastwards as we go through Saturday. So into this afternoon, We've still got a weather front just lingering across the very far south of the UK, and then this next area of rain just moving into southern Scotland as the afternoon goes on. In between and also across the very far north of Scotland, we will see some bright spells and certainly a calmer day for north east Scotland compared to Friday. But in the sunshine across the Midlands into East Anglia, we could see highs reaching 14, 15, possibly even 16 degrees. So another very mild day to come. Into this evening, the band of rain across Scotland will gradually work its way into the North Sea. This will allow some clearer and colder conditions to develop, so we could see a few icy patches come Sunday morning. Elsewhere, a cooler night than of late, but still on the mild side. Temperatures generally staying up into the mid-single figures. So we start the day on a fairly quiet note across the south, but further north we have this band of rain which will gradually work its way across Scotland as the day goes on, turning quite heavy and persistent and accompanied by a strengthening wind. Northern Ireland, Northern England also rather cloudy, could just see a few outbreaks of rain here, but further south a fairly calm afternoon to come, good sunny spells, especially down towards southwest England, central southern England, and again temperatures reaching 14 or 15 degrees. The area of rain will continue to work its way northeastwards as we go into Sunday evening. Quite a wet and windy night to come across the very far north of Scotland. That will transfer its way a little bit further southwards as we go into Monday. But overall, we start the week on a mild note. But note the temperatures on Wednesday turning colder for all of us by then.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and Friends on GB News. Today it's with me, Nicholas Owen. Now then, the Scottish leader Anas Sarwar has said his party is ready for government in a rallying cry to activists at the party conference. Mr Sarwar made a direct plea to Conservative and SNP voters ahead of the next election, urging them to put their trust in Labour. Also, Ian Murray MP will give his address to the Scottish Labour Party annual conference later in the day. Well, our Scotland reporter Tony Maguire is in Edinburgh and he has more.
Hello, welcome to Edinburgh, to the bustling exhibition hall. Yes, today we had the pleasure of sitting around a table with Anas Sarwar to grill him on some of the finer points before he makes his long march towards the role of First Minister, he hopes, at the next general election. The air here among party members is very one of cool, calculated and confident. So who knows what the party will still bring to us over the next couple of days. Up in a huddle today with the press, Anna Sarwar dealt with such things as the GRR, NHS, teacher strikes, and some of the more constitutional questions that have been brought to the fore with Nicola Sturgeon's resignation. I asked him specifically, just before we came on air, about how we're going to bring Scotland together when each side of the independence question remains perpetually at odds.
We have a huge opportunity right now in Scotland to move past the politics of division, whether that's SNP division or indeed Tory division, and to demonstrate to people that governments can do more than just manage decline. This isn't as good as it gets. Change is possible. We don't have to pit Scot against Scot or community against community. We can come together, work together to confront the challenges facing Scotland, to strengthen Scotland but also renew and modernise the UK. That's the platform and the pitch the Labour Party is standing on, and that's the one we're confident on heading into the next general election.
And there we have it. It sounds certainly like Anna Sarwar certainly is not going for second place in the next Scottish general election. He's going for First Minister position. Obviously, over on the other side of the city, much is being said about Nicola Sturgeon's replacement. But here in the Assembly Rooms in Edinburgh, the next big speaker to take the stage is Ian Murray. Ian Murray being a bit of a lone wolf down in Westminster. He is Labour's only Scottish MP for the last 4 years. And depending on what polls that you read over the last week or so, you know, we could be joined by quite a few more colleagues from north of the border. Meanwhile, tomorrow, of course, the big hitter is Keir Starmer, where I'm pretty sure you'll expect to see me again, packed among a much tighter crowd here in the Assembly Rooms in Edinburgh.
Thank you very much indeed. Tony Maguire there. Now, a protest against the Metropolitan Police is set to take place outside Scotland Yard today. Copwatch Network says their Raise the Alarm protest is being held to demonstrate anger against an institution that, in their words, protects and produces rapists such as David Carrick and Wayne Couzens. Our national reporter Theo Chikomba is outside Scotland Yard for us now. Theo.
Good afternoon. Well, we're here outside New Scotland Yard. We're expecting to see Copwatch members come here this afternoon to protest what they say is some of the things that are going wrong within the Metropolitan Police. But it's not just here in London, it's elsewhere across the country where police officers have found themselves in court for misusing their positions and not doing what the public would deem as acceptable in their eyes. In the last couple of months, we've heard from the new Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, about some of the challenges he's faced since taking over from Dame Cressida Dick last year, who in her tenure she came across challenges including stop and search and other things which were happening in the police at the time. And just a couple of weeks ago, Sir Mark Rowley was speaking at the London Assembly's Police and Crime Committee meeting, saying the public should prepare for more painful stories as the force confronts the issues that it faces. He went on to say cases including violence against women and girls, offences such as domestic abuse and sex offences, and there's a trickle of them, and there's more which are going to be coming to the surface over the next couple of months. He's saying we haven't normally applied pressure in terms of ruthlessness when it comes to our own force members, and we should be doing that as we do when it comes to members of the public. So they have come across so many challenges in the last couple of months and indeed the last few years. So people coming here are coming to protest on that and also calling for those who are in police forces to be called out and be taken out of the force. So we're expecting many of them to come here, and this afternoon we'll be hearing from them.
Theo Chikomba at Scotland Yard, thank you very much indeed. Well, it's time now for Good Causes, where we highlight the work of an individual or individuals or organisations who go above and beyond to raise awareness of those less fortunate. This week, we're not just covering one charity, but several through the medium of film. The Smiley Charity Film Awards, which are showcasing the work of charities such as the Harry Kane Foundation, Ripple Suicide Prevention, Bank the Food and Bernardo's. Well, here to tell us more is the co-founder, Simon Burton. Welcome to the show. Just explain what the whole principle is and what you're trying to do.
Thank you for having me.
So the principle is very simple. In the modern world, video matters, whether it's TV or TikTok or YouTube or Instagram. And there are 200,000 charities in the UK, all trying to get their stories heard. So Charity Film Awards is a very simple proposition. It's a showcase for the very best of charity filmmaking, and it's designed in a way which allows the smallest, most niche charity to compete with the big guys.
Right, OK. So if we ask who can enter, it sounds like absolutely anybody can.
Absolutely any registered charity or community interest company can enter.
And so you get together all these things over a period, and you have a panel of judges yourself, and
well, no, think of it as a bit more like a Strictly Come Dancing or a Britain's Got Talent model. So the charities they enter their films from the previous year, and we make that very simple for them. It takes them about 7 or 8 clicks to do that. So really simple process. And then this is the secret sauce, Nicholas. The charities do something very unusual for a charity. They ask for something which isn't related to any extreme effort. There's no mega challenge. They're not asking for money. They ask their supporters to view the film and vote. So the first round of the competition is just a public vote. And the charity's supporters engage with the film and share on social media. And then we go from 400 charities who entered this year, so this is 400 good causes we're celebrating, to about 150, and we're at that stage now. 60,000 people voted in the first round of public voting, and now things get spicy. Now we have a panel of expert judges who will decide the overall winners, but alongside that we reopen the public vote, so we have a people's choice in every category as well.
My goodness me, it sounds an interesting process. But forgive me, doesn't it just mean that every charity will have their own supporters voting like mad, and people could vote over and over again? There has to be some sort of screening process, otherwise it would be unfair, wouldn't it?
Well, there's 2 elements in making sure this is balanced and fair. The first is that we segment by turnover. So a major national household name charity won't be competing against a small local charity. Charities are competing like for size. And there are 2 points to make about just the charity's supporters viewing, which is once the supporters view the film, some of them haven't even seen the film before, they can only vote once for the film, and then they share on social media. So suddenly, I watch a film for a charity you care about, and I vote, and then you see I've seen that film, and you go on and vote. So, to answer your question, every year we more than double the views of the average film taking part and add hundreds of millions of total views to all of the films because of the power of social media.
Right, so it's a competition, but it's also a great way of promoting all those charities and the whole idea of it.
Right, but for us the ethos is winning is great, but every vote is more important. Every view is what matters.
Now, what about what makes a good charity video? Is there a way... Let's break it up. Let's say very big charities, just out of the air, Cancer Research UK, for example. I think they're probably the biggest cancer charity out there. What sort of... Somebody like that, an organisation like that, have a huge team, one imagines, and lots of very clever producers and things. But what really grabs, what works for them?
That's very interesting, because Cancer Research UK, who compete in the awards regularly, probably make multiple films in a year. So part of their challenge is picking which films. So they'll have films for fundraising events. They'll have films that are direct appeals against the cause. They might have a film with a celebrity ambassador involved. Whereas a smaller charity probably only gets one bite of the cherry a year in terms of its making its film. I would say that what makes a truly effective charity film is authenticity and with a dash of creativity in the storytelling. There's only so much you can do, given that we're dealing with people in adversity and we need to present that in an optimistic and positive way. And the real difference is, how do you make that authenticity of expression have a little bit of imagination and creativity with it?
Right, OK. That sounds relatively straightforward, but as you say, for a small charities, it's who don't have the sort of resources of the big ones, that's quite a tricky thing to get right, isn't it?
Yes, but I'd say if you viewed any of the films, you'd be taken aback by how effective some of the smaller charities, particularly the more focused charities who are more digitally native, younger charities. You know, those turning over between 5 and 20 million turnover charities tend to be focused on a single issue. and produced really compelling films because they understand digital. They're younger, that's their audience.
Yes. So the power of social media here is so important, isn't it? You hear so much today, don't you? I mean, we're all aware of this and we're all doing our bit to sort of attract people to watch things and take notice of things. But people's attention spans, generally speaking, I think all the evidence is they're doing this, they're doing this, they're doing this, they're doing this. So these things have still got to be, if you like, more and more professionally done. Would you agree with that?
The word I would use is more and more succinctly done. There is a real danger, and you understand this as a broadcaster and someone who's watched the evolution of narrative and storytelling.
All the way back to actual film, in my case.
Right, indeed. So the average length of a film or a watch on YouTube is 4 minutes, 11 seconds.
Oh.
So you've got to be performing pretty well to make a 5-minute film and have it stick.
Yeah.
You've got to be outperforming the norm. And TikTok, for instance, is even shorter than that. So for me, it's about succinctness. It's about authenticity, succinctness, and not trying to tell two stories at once. You know this as a journalist. One simple story. Make that stick. Come back with the second story.
Now, you've been running these... This is not the first year of these awards.
This is the 6th year.
The 6th year?
This is the 6th edition in the 7th year.
Yes, right, OK. Winners from past years, names we would have heard of, but people stick in your mind? Can you remember?
Macmillan, Save the Children, are big-name winners, but also Child Bereavement UK, the British Hedgehog Preservation Society, Communities for Development. Because of our turnover segmentation, small charities can win and then get access to huge audiences. And it's important to stress, the charities pay nothing for this. This is a philanthropic exercise to help them tell their stories, funded by the Smiley Movement. And that means that when we have this gala celebration at the Odeon, Leicester Square, it's the charity's red carpet. They're there celebrating and being recognised for the incredible impact they have on the communities around the UK.
That's the award ceremony when you finally announce the winners. Just tell us about that. It's said Leicester Square, as you say, a very familiar place for the red carpet, It's
red carpet. We'll have a smattering of celebrities. We'll have a celebrity host. We have big cinema seats. All of the charities get their popcorn on their sweets. We treat it like a film festival. It's important to stress these films are emotional, but many of them are funny and uplifting, and just the indefatigableness of people in the face of adversity might be tear-jerking, but it's also inspiring and powerful. And we show the winning films.
And that's on March the
21st, and everyone can go to the website and view all of the films, and we will stream the ceremony live. We'd love you to come as our guest, Nicholas.
Well, that's very kind. I'll have to look at the diary, but it sounds lovely. What's the website, just to remind us of that?
SmileyCharityFilmAwards.com.
Very simple. Thank you very much indeed. Simon Burt there, founder of Smiley Charity Film Awards. Well, you've been getting in touch again on the big topics of the day here at GB News that we've been covering, particularly Scotland and so on. Here's one here. I've got Alan says, and I must put my glasses on, I think, don't you? I hope you think they're nice and smart for the job. Why in the media world do pundits give such credit to Sturgeon? Right, we're going back to Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister, resigned a couple of days ago. Alan goes on to say, yes, a good campaigner, but the SNP has been a disaster for Scotland. This is a left-wing separatist party with one-issue agenda that has promoted division and hatred at every opportunity. These people have done nothing at all for the vast majority of Scots who disagree with the independence farce. Marion says this, I'm so glad that Sturgeon has gone. We need to get all the lefties out of the Scottish Parliament. The Greens, like the SNP, have brought Scotland to its knees. Let's hope we get a common-sense party like the Conservative and Unionist Party in power soon. They are the only ones I trust. And here's Sue. Here's what she thinks. I'll be interested in knowing how much Sturgeon's obsession with independence has cost the taxpayers, both English and Scottish. Before we go, this week our Gloria De Piero has sat down with Dave Penman, General Secretary of the First Division Association. Now, he's the leader of the Civil Service Trades Union, you could put it like that. He was asked about the bullying allegations against the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab.
Talking about, at this point in time, we think more than 24 civil servants have come forward, 8 separate complaints, 3 different government departments, over a period of 4 years. So all of that has to be investigated. That doesn't mean he's guilty, but it suggests there's something quite substantial here around his conduct that so many civil servants, and it's not easy to complain about a government minister, so many civil servants have come forward over such a long period of time with complaints.
Well, you can watch the full interview on the GB News show Gloria Meets, where you'll find out who the person behind the politician is. That's every Sunday at 6 p.m. Well, that's all we've got time for today. We'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Hello there. Welcome to your Met Office forecast. I'm Craig Snell. So here's the situation for this weekend. Still some rain around, especially across the north of the country, but for the south, it's certainly going to remain very mild. So here's the situation at the moment. We've had a couple of areas of low pressure move through overnight. This one will still continue to track its way eastwards as we go through Saturday. So into this afternoon, we've still got a weather front just lingering across the very far south of the UK, and then this next area of rain just moving into southern Scotland as the afternoon goes on. In between and also across the very far north of Scotland, we will see some bright spells and certainly a calmer day for north east Scotland compared to Friday. But in the sunshine across the Midlands into East Anglia, we could see highs reaching 14, 15, possibly even 16 degrees. So another very mild day to come. Into this evening, the band of rain across Scotland will gradually work its way into the North Sea. This will allow some clearer and colder conditions to develop, so we could see a few icy patches come Sunday morning. Elsewhere, a cooler night than of late, but still on the mild side. Temperatures generally staying up into the mid-single figures. So we start the day on a fairly quiet note across the south, but further north we have this band of rain which will gradually work its way across Scotland as the day goes on, turning quite heavy and persistent and accompanied by a strengthening wind. Northern Ireland, Northern England also rather cloudy, could just see a few outbreaks of rain here, but further south a fairly calm afternoon to come, good sunny spells, especially down towards southwest England, central southern England, and again temperatures reaching 14 or 15 degrees. The area of rain will continue to work its way northeastwards as we go into Sunday evening. Quite a wet and windy night to come across the very far north of Scotland. That will transfer its way a little bit further southwards as we go into Monday. But overall, we start the week on a mild note. But note the temperatures on Wednesday turning colder for all of us by then.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, at 9:30 on Sunday morning when I'll be speaking to Penny Mordaunt, Leader of the House of Commons, about defence spending, Nicola Sturgeon and her own prime ministerial ambitions, and much more. I'll also be asking Sir Graham Brady, Chairman of the 1922 Committee of Backbench Tories, how the party plans to win the next general election without Boris Johnson. And Callum Best, son of Manchester United legend George Best,